I'm not sure what they're doing over there in Minnesota, but what I do know is that it's broke. Welcome in or welcome back to the dark side of the moon. Normally I wouldn't have this light on, but it's a little bit after 5 o'clock and all the natural light is gone. But we move forward. I don't know if some of you guys are like this, but when I have a group of people that are my friends or that I care about inside my family, whatever the case may be, if they are fans of NBA basketball, I try to keep tabs of their favorite teams. Because of my friend Twan, I keep an extra eye on the Miami Heat. Because of my friend Aaron, I keep an eye on the Nuggets and the Hornets. And because of my dear friend Riley, I pay attention to the Minnesota Timberwolves. And what I've noticed this year is mediocrity to the absolute highest degree. And listen, I get it. Playing in the West is difficult, especially this year. You could have a record that would be good enough for fourth in the East and miss the play-in entirely in the West. I understand. But after coming off of a conference finals berth, a couple games away from making it to the NBA Finals, I think we all expected just a little bit more from the Minnesota Timberwolves. And yes, of course, there were some questions coming into this year because of the trade of Karl-Anthony Towns to the New York Knicks and bringing in Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. What was that fit going to be like? You don't have this release valve anymore in Karl-Anthony Towns, so how are you going to shift this offense? Now, I will give credit where credit is due. Julius Randle is putting up similar numbers to Karl-Anthony Towns without the ability to shoot the three-pointer as well. I think Cat last year shot like 41% from three, and Julius Randle is nowhere close to that. And you can argue with the wall if you want, but the Minnesota Timberwolves brought in Dante to be this lead guard guy. After Mike starts to go downhill or he retires or he just doesn't want to play that many minutes anymore and he goes to the bench, they brought in Dante to be that guy. He just hasn't been the guy. There are a lot of different ways that this team could have gone this year, and I think there's still a lot of ways that they can improve, but the furthest that they're going to go is as far as Anthony Edwards lets them. And as far as a stat production aspect of it goes, I don't think that Anthony Edwards has been the problem. His stats, his counting stats have been fine. I don't think he's very efficient, but I think it's deeper than that. Let's take a look at the last couple of games that the Minnesota Timberwolves have played, starting with their game against the Kings. Anyone that has played or coached basketball long enough will tell you that basketball is a game of runs, and this was a pretty good example of that. The Minnesota Timberwolves would get hot, then the Kings would get hot, then the Minnesota Timberwolves, and then ultimately they pissed away the game and ended up losing by double digits. And again, as I mentioned, the counting stats aren't necessarily the problem. 29, 5, and 5, albeit on horrendous efficiency. The problem is with the rest of the roster. Julius Randle, to his credit, had a pretty good game, was pretty efficient, but you can't have a goose egg from Jaden McDaniels, and you can't have 12 combined points for your two guys off the bench. And now let's take a look at a win. 1 point over the Clippers, who I shouldn't have to remind you, don't have Kawhi Leonard. Yes, James Harden has been playing out of his mind. Yes, Ivica Zubac has looked like a top 5 center in the league this year. But it's still the Clippers. This Clippers team should not be a playoff team. If it wasn't for James Harden being the system and Norman Powell just going off of pure rage and his hatred for Paul George and the lack of opportunity that he's had and over his 10-year career, this team wouldn't be where it's at today. So this team, this Minnesota Timberwolves team, who made it to the conference finals last year, albeit with Karl-Anthony Towns, should be making mincemeat of opponents like this. Again, we have a scenario where Anthony Edwards has a pretty good game as far as counting stats go, but his efficiency is horrendous. And again, more cases of not great showings from Julius Randle, and you're not getting a ton of bench value. And then at the time of recording last night's game against the Los Angeles Lakers, it was a blowout, almost 30 points. And yet, I'm still not impressed. I'm not impressed because the best player on the floor last night, by a pretty wide margin, was D'Angelo Russell. Anthony Davis and LeBron James shot tour dates and looked awful. And if you didn't watch the game and you're just looking at this headline, you're just looking at the final score, you might think, wow, Anthony Edwards had a really good game, or maybe a Julius Randle stepped up. Nope. This is the entire starting five's point production for last night's game. The reason this game went so well for them is because they got 41 points from their first 3 guys off of the bench, and Dante DiVincenzo finally looks like a guy who could be a lead guard one day with 9 assists. Great teams beat the teams that they're supposed to beat and are competitive with the ones that they might not be able to, but they'll always give them a fight. And this Minnesota Timberwolves team is not doing that so far. There are some other things that I'm not a fan of as far as this experiment has gone. Anthony Edwards is now becoming a more vocal leader in the locker room, and I'm not sure that he's destined to be that guy. I think his best quality is how he can back it up on the floor. And if you're talking crazy to your own teammates, I think because of his brash nature sometimes, I think it may come off the wrong way. I think you need to delegate somebody else to be that role in the locker room. They just don't have that guy. And then Anthony also came out and criticized the Minnesota Timberwolves fans for booing them when they are playing poorly, and I also don't think that's a great look. For all these faults, I think that the Minnesota Timberwolves organization themselves are also partly to blame. The Minnesota Timberwolves had an opportunity this summer to bring in this traditional mid-level exception point guard facilitator role, and instead of doing that, instead of looking for someone to replace Mike Conley eventually, they decided that in tandem, Anthony Edwards and Dante DiVincenzo would make up for the effort of playmaking and facilitating, and so far, that experiment has failed. I don't think the value of a true point guard, a facilitator, can be overestimated. If we can look at the Phoenix Suns for a second, comparing them to last year's team, it is almost night and day difference. As it stands right now, the Phoenix Suns stand at 11-8, and you may look at that and go, that's not really impressive. That's not blowing me out of the water. And while they could be a 4th seed in the East, they're 7th in the West right now. There are a couple factors that I think we need to look at, though. Now, of course, last season, the Phoenix Suns decided to go Suns point guard. They thought that Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, and to some extent Kevin Durant, could just chip in whenever they needed to be a playmaker, and that experiment failed. So this year, they brought in Tyus Jones, and it seems to have righted the ship. Devin Booker has been the absolute beacon of health, has played in every single game this year, but there are core members of this team who have missed extensive time, and in spite of that, they are still the 7th seed. Kevin Durant has missed 7 games this year. Bradley Beal has missed 8, and while he hasn't missed many games, Grayson Allen has been absolutely atrocious as a basketball player. Does not shoot the ball well from 3 like he did last year, and in spite of all of those things, they are still a competent roster. And just based off the eye test, I'd have to imagine that a lot of that credit goes to Tyus Jones. In my own view, I almost give 100% credit to Tyus Jones to hold this ship together, to be the glue that brings this team together when players like Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal are missing so much time. Most of the Suns roster is on par with or exceeding last year's production value, and bringing in someone like Tyus Jones to right the ship, to set the table for everybody else, is in no small part to that success. Which brings me to why I think that Lonzo Ball is the guy that the Minnesota Timberwolves need to right their ship. Now, this could be a trade, obviously. The one that I have seen floated around the most is this one right here. You would obviously be giving up on the Dante experiment. You would be moving away from Uncle Mike. If that doesn't work out, if this thing goes kaput almost immediately, the best case scenario is that Lonzo Ball's contract falls off of your books next year. The Chicago Bulls have already come out and said that they're in the market to sell almost everything on their team, and I think the Timberwolves need to be a part of that. Because I think it's important to remember, Lonzo Ball has had knee and leg and lower extremity issues for the entirety of his career. The only games that he has missed so far this year is because he had a hand sprain. Every time that he has been on the floor when he has been healthy, it has passed the eye test. His three-point shot looks good mechanically. It doesn't look like he's lost a step there. He's very fluid. He still plays fast. And in 15 minutes a game, he is stepping up on the defensive end, averaging 1.5 steals a game, again, in 15 minutes. Because we're 20 games into the season, I don't think that it's too early to make assumptions about what a team is and what a team is not. And I think that this Minnesota Timberwolves team, as currently constructed, is not very good. I don't think that if they went down this path further, that they would make it to a playoff spot, that they would have a 6 seed or better. I think that they need to make a drastic change like this to be competitive in the West. I also think that we just need to come to grips with a lot of this stuff. I think the Dante DiVincenzo experiment is over. I don't think he's played well, partly because there was so much pressure for him to play well in New York that he forced himself to playing well. And there's not that kind of pressure in Minnesota, so he has kind of fallen off the wagon. And I don't want you to get this twisted. I love Uncle Mike. Uncle Mike is one of my favorite players ever, but he is not getting any younger, and if you were going to capitalize off of his contract, you might as well trade it for someone who could be good and is still relatively young. The best case scenario for Lonzo Ball in this system would be that he gets to fly up and down the court with Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He has the ability to have a two-man game with him and Julius Randle. He can throw lobs to Rudy Gobert. That's the best case scenario. You also get the defensive effort, and I'm sure that his three-point shooting will get around the 38% mark for the year. And the absolute worst case scenario for this is that none of this works out. Lonzo doesn't play the way that I think he's going to, or he gets hurt immediately. But again, at bare minimum, his contract, his $21 million, will fall off the books next year, and you can start fresh with a new point guard going into next season. But like I said, his injury so far this year has been a hand sprain. It's nothing of the lower extremities. That has looked really solid so far, and I know that because he is kind of playing really risky. He's running up and down the floor. He's playing defense. He's exerting effort. I don't think that you would do that if you were still ginger on your lower extremities. Lonzo's in a weird situation. He is playing behind Kobe White, Josh Giddey, and Ayo Dosunmu, And I just don't think that that necessarily needs to be the case, but I also don't think that the Bulls are in a position to give him all the PT that he wants. Lonzo is ready to give to a team. He's ready to contribute to a team and prove that he still belongs in this league. I think that, again, if you want to shake things up, if you want to change the way that you're doing things, the least you could do is get a fast-paced, decently three-point shooting, defensive-minded point guard who could set the table for your entire team for the rest of the season and potentially turn this around. But that's all I've got today. What do you think the Minnesota Timberwolves should do? Do you think they should stay the course? Do you think they should make a big swing? Let me know down in the comments below. Check my link tree while you're at it. Join the Discord. Be kind. Tell somebody you love them. And I'll see you in the next one.